Welcome to Soccer 101. My name is Daryl Grove, and sitting across the table from me, it's Taylor Rockwell. Hello.
Hello, how you doing, buddy?
I am great. We are here to talk about derbies. Specifically, what is a derby?
Yeah.
Why is it called a derby?
Interesting.
And isn't it pronounced derby?
You would think so.
That's for our American audience.
I think I've answered everything.
There you go. Show done?
Yeah, I think so. Except not at all.
We're also, later in the show, going to name some of our favourite derbies. Mm-hmm. Not all of them, because we'll be here all day, but we'll also get into what makes each derby special.
That works for me.
Okay, so let's answer the big question first. Why is it called a derby? Because I can understand, especially if you're a new soccer fan, say in the United States, you're just thinking, what? Why is it the Merseyside derby? What is going on here?
Mm-hmm. Well, as with most things that originate in England, I would say it's a little confusing. Is that the best way to put it?
It's always some weird English thing.
You all have too much history, is what it is. Because really, I think what it comes down to is that there are two possible explanations.
Yeah.
One seems more likely than the other, is how I'm going to phrase that.
I would say there are two possible explanations, and one's right and one's wrong.
Okay.
That's my feeling on the issue.
Can I take a guess? Is the horse race run wrong?
No, I think the horse race one is
okay.
correct.
All right, let's talk about it.
Should we start with that one then?
Sure.
So this goes all the way back to 1780.
The 12th Earl of Derby.
The 12th, that's exactly it, the 12th Earl of Derby. So there's a new horse race that's inaugurated in Epsom, and it's hosted by Edward Smith Stanley, the 12th Earl of Derby. And so they named the new race the Derby Stakes in honour of the Earl of Derby.
Okay. Simple
as that. And so it becomes such a big thing. It is still the big horse race in England. Everybody sort of bets on this and gets excited about this, even if they don't normally care about horse racing. So again, 1780. From there, Derby just becomes this sort of generic term for big sporting event. Okay. That's how big that horse race is. And then it just gets rolled into the Merseyside Derby, the North London Derby. They all become the North London big sporting event.
Okay.
It's really as simple as that.
All right. Well, as my guess earlier may have indicated, I'm not sure I agree with you. But before we get into maybe debating the origins of them, let's also maybe explain the other possible explanation for the origin.
Other possible explanation, which I'm not buying, but it sounds like maybe you are. It goes to the Shrovetide Tuesday match, which is a weird, big, it's technically football from back in the day. I want to say like late 12th century is the first historical record of it, where in Derbyshire, which is a county, which Derby City is within the county, but in Derbyshire, in Ashburn, there's this massive medieval football game that essentially the goals are quite far apart, and they're like at the top end and bottom end of a town.
Yep.
And two gigantic teams try to push a ball towards each goal, and it basically takes all day. Did you read the rules for this thing?
I did not.
Some of them were like, it is illegal to murder. That's one of the laws.
They instituted
one of the
that
laws
one,
of the game.
They instituted that one after the fact, because I think the initial one, they were like around when it was first started, there were like over 1,000 participants, and there were multiple fatalities.
There were,
so I guess
because
they had to make that rule happen.
Yep, and also the game has to stop at 10 p.m. was another one of the rules.
How very English. Yes.
So my guess is that the other explanation is that people. This became like a big sporting event, the Derby, which is happening in Derbyshire. So big football matches started being called derbies.
Well, I would say more. The reason why I think it makes more sense is because you're talking about a football match that consists primarily of participants from one half of a town versus the other half of a town in Derbyshire. To me, all of the like familiar symptoms of match within the same city, local rivals in a place called Derby.
Yeah.
To me, that makes more sense. I'm not saying it does, and I'm saying maybe they've that's a lot of apocryphal history. But to me, there's still so many jumps in the there was a big horse race and it was named after the Earl of Derby, and we went from a Derby horse race to two teams from the same city not liking each other. There's a lot of jumps in there that I don't quite connect.
But here's the big thing, right? People say local derby, right? Because derbies are not always local.
This is true.
Right? So Manchester, Liverpool, two different cities. Barcelona, Real Madrid, two different cities. So derbies are not just about something going on within the same city.
Yeah.
Derbies are just big sporting events. Here's my other evidence for Derby being the name for a big sporting event. Kentucky Derby, the Home Run Derby, all these things in the United States, they're all named after that concept of Derby being a big sporting event.
Yeah. I mean, I would say, though, that one of those is also a horse race. So to me, that makes more sense.
One of them is not.
True. But I still am going to say Shrovetide. Why not? All day, every day.
Wow.
A match that still happens. Just saying.
Of course, yeah, but more as like a fun historical reenactment.
I can't hit you over the sound of it being the obvious answer to this one. But no, I think conventionally the conventional wisdom is that yours is probably the actual answer.
Yes.
It just it seems like there's just a lot of jumps in there that make me question it. I'll put it that way.
Okay, well, if you're done questioning it, I want to talk about it a little more.
Let's do it.
There's a chance that this horse race was going to be called the Bunbury, because there was a famous guest apparently at this first event in 1780 called Sir Charles Bunbury, and the maybe apocryphal story is that the Earl of Derby and Sir Charles Bunbury flipped a coin to see who the horse race would be named after, and Derby won the coin toss, and so it was the Derby Stakes. So we could be talking about the North London Bunbury.
That feels like a thing that a landed member of the aristocracy was probably not going to gamble on.
Yeah.
I feel like they wanted their name on as many things as possible.
Well, maybe the 12th Earl of Derby had a double-sided coin.
That could also be.
Or they probably just named it after him anyway.
He is. I have heard that the 12th Earl of Derby is also the inspiration for Harvey Dent. That could be wrong. I don't know.
That sounds apocryphal. All right, so if we take my version to be true, I also read up on when people first started using this, especially when newspapers first started using this phrase. And it was apparently 1840 is when they would first start using that name, Derby, to refer to big rivalry matches.
Yeah.
Because that's what we're really talking about, right, is some sort of big rivalry match.
Yes.
Before we get into naming some of the more interesting ones, I want to get into this Derby thing.
Sure.
Because I think that confuses a lot of Americans, because they'll hear, I keep using Merseyside Derby because it's just the one that comes most readily to mind. And then I think people will be confused about whether they should be calling it Merseyside Derby. So what do you think?
I say Derby.
You do?
And that's...
But you say Home Run Derby and you say Kentucky Derby.
Because
right?
those are American things.
Okay.
And I think that's what it comes down to for me, is like we try on the Total Soccer Show and on this show.
Total Soccer Show is our other show. Please download that and listen as well.
We try to, I think, do our best job with pronunciation, with reflecting where the players come from, where the teams come from.
We take the Samuel Beckett approach.
I don't know what that is.
Fail better.
Okay.
That was his advice.
Stop being English is my advice. No, but it's basically, I think for me, I know that you call it Derby. I know that my primary source of soccer, like in my youth, was watching English soccer, and so that's kind of where my origin of soccer comes from, at least in terms of fandom.
Yeah.
And so to me, it makes sense to follow that route.
Yeah.
Like if I'm talking about American soccer, if I'm talking to Americans, I'll say soccer. If we were in England, I would know better. I would call it football. I think I have you can flip that switch a little bit.
Yeah.
I don't think I would ever call it the Manchester Derby, because I think most people know it as Derby.
Okay, I bet there's also as well, for maybe you and for other Americans, there's that original thing of not wanting to appear that you don't know anything about soccer.
Yeah.
And I feel like even if it's not true, calling it the Manchester Derby would be like some weird tell to some hardcore soccer fans that maybe you don't know as much as you actually do.
I promise I'm not trying to just consistently rip on the British here, but it does feel like that is a specifically uniquely English thing. That like if I called it a derby to for lack of a better person that comes to mind, Jonathan Wilson, of Football Weekly, of Inverted Pyramid, I feel like he would instantly be like, well, it's actually Derby. It comes from, and would tell me that story. But he would probably also say Ilkay Gundogan. He wouldn't really trouble himself to properly pronounce that. The English don't really go out of their way to pronounce other people's names.
Oh, yeah.
But then we'll also be like, how do you not say it right?
And there's definitely, as someone who has, lived a long time on the other side of the Atlantic, there's definitely a thing of being very ready to look down on the way Americans say soccer things.
Yeah.
Including the word soccer, which is probably a whole separate episode of Soccer 101 that I'd be excited to do.
Yeah, and so with that said... And
I'm not saying that's a good idea, by the way. I'm kind of saying the English should not be doing this.
That's fair. But I would say this, if somebody says Manchester Derby, I'm not going to be like, don't you mean Derby? You don't want to be that person.
You want to be uninvited to future parties.
Exactly.
That's the way
but
to get it, right?
I personally would say Derby, and I think if you look at the pronunciation, it's not quite the aluminium where there's actually a different spelling. But if you look it up, it will say British Derby, American Derby.
Yeah.
It spells it out that way.
So Kentucky Derby, Home Run Derby. I'm struggling to think of a third one. I want to rhetorically have three. Can you give me a third Derby?
The 12th Earl of Derby.
Get out of it. And then we'll go the 12th Earl of Derby.
Yeah.
Be very disrespectful to get the name right. And Derby County and the Liverpool Derby, the Merseyside Derby, and so on.
He's rolling over in his, I assume, well-appointed grave. Probably a mausoleum.
Before we get to maybe, getting into what makes some of these derbies very interesting, today's episode of Soccer 101 is sponsored by, you guessed it, Postmates.
I've heard of them before. I expect we'll hear from them again. When you need red wine at 4 p.m., sushi at 9 p.m., a breakfast burrito at 8 a.m., you can Postmate it to get those products, or if you're enjoying this episode about derbies and you want to get like rival products in so you can enjoy two different things while you hear about rivalries, you could order, I'm trying to think here, you could order Indian and Pakistani food to really set it off. Yeah, exactly.
Oh, wow.
You weren't ready for that one, were you?
And have a chat about the Kashmir region.
Yeah, exactly. While wearing a cashmere sweater?
I was thinking...
While listening to Led Zeppelin's Kashmir. Perfect. Got it. Nailed it.
I was thinking you could find like the two rival taco places in your town and just get a taco delivered from each one via Postmates.
The less serious one.
Get them to arrive as close as possible and then have a taste off.
Yeah.
A taco off.
All right.
Taco derby.
I don't know what else you could do here, but I'm going to leave it alone. I don't know if you're in a state where you can have alcohol delivered. You could get like Bushmills and Jameson, so you've got like Protestant and Catholic Irish.
You could do that via Postmates.
Yeah, exactly.
Here in Virginia, you'd have to send Postmates to the ABC store.
You would.
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't know if you want to do
so
that.
So the way it works, pretty much anything that you want, Postmates will. The service is, they'll go pick it up for you and bring it to you.
They will.
It's kind of amazing when you think about it. Mm-hmm. Even better, their bike flies through the air and goes through the stars.
Is that how
it works?
At least
based on the logo.
Based on the logo.
That's how they get there so fast, I'm pretty sure.
They do, and if you are, say, involved in a derby and you're not sure if you can go outside because maybe things are too tense, then you stay inside, Postmates brings it to your door.
Is this in Istanbul?
Yeah, you just like crack the door a little bit, take the food, you don't even have to go outside, no one can see you, you're safe in there.
Yeah, no more trips to the store, no trips into the throngs of rival soccer fans.
I mean, actually, now that you bring it up, there were definitely times when I would walk to the store, which was like 2 blocks away from Beşiktaş Stadium, and I would like make sure I wasn't wearing anything like Galatasaray colored during, like when it was a match day, just because, you know, you never want to, like, frustrate people if you don't have to.
So if you want to get started with Postmates, you can download the app for free on your Apple product or your Android product.
For free.
And then you can like browse, see what's around your local restaurants. Pretty much any restaurant worth its salt in your area is connected to Postmates. I know that because I checked here in Richmond, and everywhere that I liked, it was on there.
Restaurants should have salt, by the way.
Restaurants should also have salt in the food, but not too much. Not just
too much.
Just enough to make it tasty.
They should, and they should have it 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, which is exactly what Postmates offers you. They'll bring you what you need within the hour.
And then for a limited time, Postmates is giving our listeners $100. I did that like on a game show. A free delivery credit for your first 7 days. To start your free deliveries, you download the app and you use the code SOCCER.
That's code SOCCER for $100 of free delivery credit.
$100.
My mistake. I'm going the more like Bill Hader SNL host, where it's a little bit like for $100. A free delivery credit for your first 7 days when you download the Postmates app.
Anything you need, anytime you need it, Postmate it. Download Postmates and save with code SOCCER. I also want to take a moment to mention, like, the reason that Soccer 101, we've been able to do this first season, is that we have a sponsor like Postmates that was willing to sponsor before the whole show was even live. So I just want to say I'm very grateful that Postmates was willing to sponsor Soccer 101.
As am I. Now let's talk favorite derbies. But before we do that, we should probably talk about what like constitutes favorite, I guess, is the best way to put it, because...
Have we specifically said what constitutes a derby? I guess we have, right? I've talked about how it's not local, how it's just some big rivalry for any reason.
Which is interesting, because I think like my understanding of derbies was always, even before researching this, was that it is... A local derby is what a derby is, but then you can have other fierce rivalries which have evolved into being called derbies. But you're right, that's not the case at all. It really is just like that fierce rivalry between two teams for whatever reason can be a derby.
All right, so do you want to kick us off, Taylor? Which derby would you like to talk about?
I do, but first I would like to say that like there are, as you said in the very beginning, there are so many derbies out there that could all, have their own half an hour-long episode.
Yes.
And I say that up front to say that like the rivalry, the Superclasico between Boca and River in Argentina, that is, in my opinion, the biggest rivalry, because it affects like an entire country, and it like in the world over, everybody wants to watch it, everybody's fascinated by it. I don't have that much of a personal connection to it, and so to be honest, I feel like it would be disingenuous for me to sit here and talk all about how much I love this and how much it means to me and why it's so cool. And I think what I would end up doing is telling you a lot about stuff that I've read that makes it seem interesting to me and isn't necessarily a thing that I have like more of a personal connection to. And that's what a lot of mine are going to be.
I think also both of us, even if we don't want a minute, are slightly soccer hipstery. So we've chosen more interesting than the obvious. For example, neither of us have El Clasico, which I would argue I actually think is the biggest one going, not least because they have the best players in the world at Real Madrid and Barcelona. Again, that's
Well,
probably
at Barcelona, they sure do.
Hey, you don't know when this episode's going out. They could be Champions League winners again.
You're right.
So that's probably worth its own episode of Soccer 101
Probably.
sometime in the future. North London Derby is full of passion and everybody loves that. I don't think either of us have that one either. Basically, there are lots of big ones that won't get mentioned today, but I wanted to sneak in a mention anyway.
All right, that works. So with all that said, I think I'm going to go strangely John Cusack, high fidelity style. I'm going autobiographical here. So I'm going to start with Manchester United v Liverpool. I guess you could call it the Northwest Derby. That for me was like the first time I really got into soccer was like aside from playing it myself, was as a Manchester United fan when I was like 12 years old. And it really was in that period where like the team becomes your identity almost. And so it was like, I'm a Man United fan, you're a Liverpool fan, like, I'm going to talk trash to you. I don't really talk as much trash anymore, mostly because I'm old enough and wise enough to know that it comes back to bite you. But at this time, it was like, I feel like this rivalry is the most reflective of like my tribal mentality, to the point that even like I think a while back we were watching a Champions League game. It was the PSG Liverpool game, and I didn't really want to root for PSG, but I could not bring myself to root for Liverpool, and it's because of this rivalry.
Okay, I got you.
Yeah. So now you've obviously you have lived in England. Would you say that is like the biggest, most dramatic rivalry in England?
Might be the North London Derby.
Yeah.
I think it's between those two.
Okay.
Right. I would also weirdly the Merseyside Derby, which is Liverpool Everton, gets a good billing. It's often one of the televised games. But Manchester United Liverpool has this weird, I think, history because with all due respect to Everton, Manchester United are the more successful team. Liverpool are obviously a very successful team. And it becomes this thing of these two teams going at each other to be, the greatest in English football.
And I think that's the key thing. Because first of all, I mean, they like 121 or more various titles between the two. It is the two most successful teams. I think it's also the case that this is the one that was like, when I was growing up, this was the two biggest teams. You had other teams coming in there as well, but it wasn't the same as, say, probably kids growing up who were like 12 when Man City first started getting money or 10 years old. That is probably the formative one now. And really, it's probably like Man City, Liverpool at this point is like those two teams that are routinely the most interesting and compete the most regularly. But I feel like this used to be like on the level of El Clasico at various points in history because it was the two biggest teams going against each other.
The weird thing to me about the Manchester-Liverpool derby, there's a city pride rivalry because they're both in the northwest. They're not too far apart, right? Even though it's obviously not the same city. The interesting thing to me is even though there's two great teams, it's almost never them going for the title in that same season, right? There's the Manchester-Liverpool derbies where Liverpool through the late 70s and through the 80s were the best team in England. And then there's Manchester United, basically through the 90s and the early 2000s, were the best team in England. But it was never they were the two best teams in England. And like Man United win the league one season, Liverpool win it the next season, right? Man United did not win the league at all through the 80s. Liverpool did not win the league at all through the 90s. So it has this weird
and 2000s.
Symmetry and asymmetry to it. Don't bring it to this show. Don't bring it to this show.
I won't.
Anything else to say on the Manchester-Liverpool derby?
I mean, like we could get into the various incidents that kind of stand out in that one, but
it gets a bit listy then, right? I
feel like you can find those highlights. All I'll say is I will forever love Gary Neville for grabbing the badge and showing it to the cop. Or maybe that was at home, so it might have been just to the traveling fans.
So you went John Cusack style, biographical. I've done the exact same thing.
Right.
My first one is the Black Country Derby, which is the Wolverhampton Wanderers, my team, versus West Bromwich Albion game. Maybe a quick bit of history in case no one's heard of the Black Country. It's the region that I'm from, so called because there was so much industry, factories, foundries and all that the sky was literally black with smoke and ash and industry.
Seems like a great backdrop to participate in an athletic competition that requires lots of heavy breathing.
Yeah, it's the cough, cough, cough derby.
There we go. Black Country, Black Lung Derby.
Yeah.
There you go.
So obviously this is the one that I have, a personal thing where I've been in the middle of it and I've observed it. And it's the real thing where, you would go to school or, you go to the factory, go to the office, and depending on who's won, one side is up and one side is down. This is true of all derbies, but it's just this is the time when I've really seen it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So it has this extra special thing to me.
But did you have that same thing where on match days at least, where you like West Brom, I can't stand them, or have you always had that Daryl Grove neutrality about you?
I think I have a bit of that neutrality where I don't want to get into the othering someone and then hating them. Actually, this whole derby thing makes me uncomfortable because so much of that happens, right? Yeah. But what I do have is I still know that rivalry is there, and so I have nerves, essentially. Anytime Wolves play West Brom, I just have nerves that day because it might go wrong. You know what I'm saying?
But
it might go wrong.
But then let me ask you this. Do you have that same thing that I have with Liverpool with West Brom? That, like, if they're losing, will you do a silent, like, yes, this is how it's supposed to be? Okay.
No, I don't. Right. But part of that is, it's also one of the reasons I like this derby as well, is this derby doesn't happen all that much anymore, right? Half the time, they're in the wrong division. Like, there's a long time Wolves were in the second or third tier, West Brom were in the Premier League. We recently passed each other, so now Wolves are in the Premier League at time of recording.
In your face, baggies.
West Brom are in the second tier. You know what I'm saying, though? It's like, this thing has now become special because unlike Manchester United, Liverpool, you don't know that you're definitely getting it twice a year. You might not get it for 4 or 5 years at a time, right? It might not exist at all.
That makes sense. One more question for you about this one. Is this the type of thing that, like, is it passed down? Like, is your father a Wolves fan and not a West Brom fan?
Yeah.
Is your brother as well? All your siblings?
It's roughly your area and your family and your friends, right? Some people, if the family hasn't passed it down, then you get peer pressured by your friend group into supporting a certain team.
That makes sense.
Right? Yeah. The one thing I really love about this is there is a weird, like, Black Country sense of humour, which I would say I have a little bit. This is, like, sunk itself into this derby as well. So there's an exchange of songs that has happened between Wolves and West Brom fans, which, if you'll indulge me for like a minute or two, I'm going to share with you.
I always want to hear Dale Grove sing.
I'm not going to sing it, but I'm going to give you the lyrics.
Always want to hear Dale Grove sing.
All right, so you've heard me talk about Steve Bull, right? So in the 1990s, late 80s and the 1990s, Wolves' best player, Steve Bull.
70% of the earth is covered by water. The rest is covered by Steve Bull.
I don't remember saying that.
I believe that was on the very first episode of the Total Soccer Show. You said that.
He's Wolves' like all-time leading goal scorer. He's this big hero, right? He's from the area, right? So West Brom fans, when Wolves and West Brom used to play each other a lot in the second tier in the 90s, West Brom fans used to sing Stevie Bull's a tatter. You know what tatter is?
I do not.
So it's
other than the first name of the head coach of Atlanta, or was the head coach of Atlanta.
This is spelled differently. So tatter is like an insult meaning your clothes are all tattered, like you're poor, basically. Yeah. Right. So Stevie Bull's a tatter. He wears a tatter's hat. He plays for Wolverhampton, and he's a swear word twat. He runs down the left wing, he runs down the right, but he couldn't score a goal if he played all swear word night. Right. So West Brom fans just singing a big insult song about Wolves' big goal threat.
Yeah.
Then Wolves fans started singing soon after, especially when Steve Bull got called up by England. He was briefly an England player, 1990 World Cup. Stevie Bull's a tatter. He wears an England cap. He plays for Wolverhampton, and he's a lovely chap. He scores with his left foot, he scores with his right, and when we play the Albion, he'll score all swear word night. So I'll say that not just to share some Wolf songs, but I love that in derbies, I love that playful back and forth with language where no one really gets hurt, but you get to have like a humorous like jab at each other.
Yeah,
you get what I'm saying?
I do love that. Those songs are definitely my favorite. When Chelsea were having a bad season and then they would sing like "We're staying up" after scoring a goal.
Yeah.
It's always those moments that make me very happy, and they do seem to come out even more hilariously and dramatically when it comes to derbies.
So there you go. That's my my brief potted history of the Black Country derby.
All right. Well, you talked a little bit about like othering of people, and I would say that like that is like for my next one the thing that kind of like drew it to my attention, the reason why I mentioned it here, and it's Hamburger SV versus FC St. Pauli.
Oh yeah,
a smaller one, but one that I love because like my background is sociology, history, and anthropology. And like this, honestly, the Total Soccer Show and these types of topics are the things that made me really excited to do these shows in the first place, because it's a blending of history and culture and soccer all together. It's really like what I enjoy about the sport. It really is. When people say keep politics out of soccer, that's the whole reason why I started really following soccer all the more.
All right.
And this to me is a good example
St.
of
Pauli
that rivalry.
do not keep politics out of soccer.
They do not, which is part of the frustration, I think, within this rivalry, because they're from the same city, Hamburg, obviously, which is the second largest city in Germany on the coast. And it's historically this very eclectic, I think pretty left-leaning city. It's very artistic. You've got a lot of like different musical movements. The Beatles, I think the famous story is like the Beatles, that was where they first played outside of England. And so these two teams represent that city. Hamburg are historically the more successful in the 70s and 80s. That was their big time to shine. That was also, especially in the 80s, when they became more associated with the right wing, something that they've worked very hard to not be associated with now, but still are, especially because they're most like in terms of geographic proximity, rivalry would be FC St. Pauli, who are about as left-wing as you can get.
But St. Pauli is in Hamburg.
Yes.
In
Oh,
the
yeah.
city,
Yeah, they basically like split, I forget what the name of the street is. It's like their red light district, but it's like they divide that street in almost half.
I can't recall it, but I've
Yeah.
heard the Beatles talk about the name of that street.
Exactly. Yeah, which is, it's kind of a misnomer.
The
because it's not-
Reeperbahn.
Yes,
There we
that's
go.
what it is. Yes.
Thanks, Paul McCartney.
Oh, no, they're very much in the same city, but that's the thing that like makes it really interesting to me is like FC St. Pauli intentionally reflected like the punk rock movement that a lot of people were into, anti-fascism. Like it's more like their stated objective is to be a social movement. They believe in the club existing for social good. That at least was like the founding principle of the 70s and 80s. It does seem like a little bit more recently it's become slightly more violent, which I think was kind of what you were talking about, which is like once you get into a little bit of the othering of things and it really becomes more about like violence and like, standing your ground, then it becomes like playful chants and stuff like that. Then you kind of go into an area that I maybe don't love as much anymore. But I love things like one of the recent ones. Did you see the things about the banners back and forth between the two?
Oh, like a tifo back and forth exchange?
Yes.
So this is the equivalent of the Wolves West Brom songs,
Yeah.
but printed on giant sheets.
Yeah. This is like, it's kind of representative of the two clubs. Maybe HSV fans would disagree, but in August of 2018, HSV were relegated finally.
HSV being Hamburg.
Yeah, were relegated for the first time. FC St. Pauli are in the Bundesliga 2, so it's the first time they played this derby in 7 years. In August of 2018, HSV Ultras unfurled a banner that said, "Satisfy our lust, 100 of you, 100 of us," challenging them to a fight.
What?
When FC St. Pauli did not respond, the next home match, HSV fans had happy hour, 2 for 1, you can have 100 and we'll have 50, to which St. Pauli finally responded with their own banner, "Satisfy our lust, 1,000 joints and 1,000 beers." Which is, and like, I just enjoyed that. And
then
then
I just became Team St. Pauli.
Yeah, exactly. And I did find it interesting that I saw an interview with a Hamburg fan who was saying like, we're not this like right-wing organization, it's just FC St. Pauli are so left-wing that we look conservative by comparison. But he was like,
we're centrists, but they're way to the left.
and this is where I'm sort of mixed because the guy says like, of course we're anti-fascist, of course we're anti-Nazi. We don't feel like you need to say that. We're more about like support our team. And then the documentary I was watching cut to an FC St. Pauli fan and he was like, no, I want to know that the person next to me is like stated anti-fascist, anti-Nazi. I want that known going in. And I was sort of like, yeah, okay, that makes sense to me. So I think I say all that to say, I definitely lean.
Can't we just all be not fascists?
Yeah, that's the way to go. But I mean, the pirate flag that is representative of FC St. Pauli, I think that's also on all their corner flags. The fact that this like super left wing club, their stadium is overlooked by this giant bomb shelter from the Nazi era World War II. Like it's just all of these different like cultural, historical symbols and signs and like things of import all factor into this one a lot for me.
All right, so Hamburg, St. Pauli. Okay, I've gone for my next one. Ajax versus Feyenoord. This is Ajax Amsterdam versus Feyenoord Rotterdam in the Netherlands.
So we're moving away from limited violence into lots of violence. Is that about it?
Yeah, I chose this as one of my few without realising how bad things had gotten between these fans. So before we get to the fan violence, which really should be very much secondary and the worst part of all derbies, I want to talk about the soccer part of it first and maybe the cultural things that led to the soccer part of it. So this is a rivalry between cities that almost predates the soccer stuff, right? So Amsterdam is the capital. Amsterdam is the cultural centre. Amsterdam, if you ask the people of Rotterdam, is elitist. Rotterdam is a port town. It's blue collar. It's more, they consider themselves more like the hard working type thing. So this whole rivalry is set up as this opposition of essentially, I want to say like working class v middle class or like hard working versus sort of lazy cultural elitists, right? Yeah. So that's the whole background to this story. Feeding into that is the fact that Ajax is the more successful team. Yeah. Right? Ajax has more European Cups and Champions Leagues. Ajax has more Dutch titles.
Well, when you're laying around reading books, there's more time to practice tactics versus working on the decks.
Well, just think of that whole Ajax Cruyff late 60s, early 70s revolution of like how it was all about thinking about football in a different way. Yeah. So that feeds into this rivalry as well. The other thing that feeds into this rivalry that I really do love is the size of their stadiums. So every time one of these clubs builds a new stadium or redoes their stadium, they make sure it is at least slightly bigger
course.
than the opposition stadium.
Gotta get that petty
It's
in
a
there.
little bit like, like the whole Manhattan skyscraper race of the 20s and 30s, just who could build the biggest one. So as things stand, at time of recording, we recorded this in 2018, the Johan Cruyff Arena, which is the Ajax Amsterdam Arena, 54,990. The Kuip, which is Feyenoord Stadium, 51,117. That's how many people it seats.
Feyenoord's losing.
Feyenoord are planning a new stadium
Of course they are.
with 70,000 seats.
There it is.
So that's scheduled. The latest estimate, it's been pushed back a few times.
Yeah.
Latest estimate is that it opens in 2022/23. If this episode survives that long, I'd love to know if that happened. But you can bet that as soon as that happens, Ajax will be thinking, all right, we're gonna expand or we're gonna build something new.
I hope they just get into like theoretical announcement territory where then it just becomes who can announce the bigger stadium faster. And then Ajax are just like, we have plans for a 150,000 seat stadium.
And they've got this classic argument thing where, yes, Ajax have won more Champions Leagues, especially Ajax had that run in the 70s. They won it in 71, 72, 73, the European Cup. Feyenoord were the first Dutch team to win the European Cup in 1970. So it's almost like they lit a fire under Ajax to go and have to win 3 to have some argument to Feyenoord winning the first European Cup for a Dutch team. Can't move on without mentioning there has been horrible fan violence in the last, say, 20 years or so. There was a guy that was killed in 1997 when the fans arranged to have this big fight. It's got to such a state right now that usually Ajax will ban its fans from travelling to Feyenoord for the derby, and Feyenoord will ban its fans from travelling to Ajax. They just want to keep these guys apart. So can't move on without mentioning that.
All right.
I've also got one story to share with you, which I believe you already know. Johan Cruyff. Do you remember the Johan Cruyff story?
I sure do, but we should talk about it anyway.
So Johan Cruyff is famously an Ajax product, right? One of the greatest players of all time. But towards the end of his career, Johan Cruyff, in 1983, won the double, the League and Cup with Ajax Amsterdam, then couldn't agree a new contract. And he was mad at Ajax. And the best way he could think of sticking his finger in the eye of the Ajax Amsterdam board and the team was to go and sign a contract with Feyenoord.
Is he, and I say this, he's one of my favorite players, if not my favorite player. Is Johan Cruyff the most, petty player in the world?
He definitely believes in his own greatness, and if someone disagrees with his greatness, he will prove them wrong.
Hell hath no fury like a Cruyff scorned.
Yeah, there we go. He went and joined Feyenoord, only for one season. I assume got well rewarded for it as well, financially, which was also part of the reason. He won the double with Feyenoord, including, they lost the first game, but they beat Ajax the second league game. Cruyff scored one of the goals.
Of course he did.
Yeah, and he left as a League and Cup winner with Feyenoord.
Yep. And celebrated with a cigarette, like all good soccer players of the 1970s and 80s.
You can't argue with what Cruyff did, smoking or no smoking. All right, one more each. We've got time for one more each.
We do, I believe. And this is again, autobiographical. This is the one that has more recently affected my life.
Richmond Kickers versus Charleston Battery?
Of course. I thought about that one,
did you
actually.
really?
I did. But in the end, it's going to be the Intercontinental Derby. It crosses continents. It's Galatasaray Fenerbahce.
I forgot you were in Turkey for at least a year, right?
Of course.
Yeah.
At least, yeah. A year and a half once.
It felt longer time.
6 months another time. Yes, and that's important to me to note because I was there in 2005 when the stadium ban had just gone into effect that Galatasaray fans could not attend matches at Fenerbahce Stadium and vice versa because, to go back to your point about Feyenoord and Ajax, there was so much violence. I think there was multiple people stabbed in multiple games, multiple fatalities, but it's all rooted, I think the first violence was in 1934, and it's been a very violent derby since.
Okay, here's the question I want to know about, though, and I think listeners will be interested in.
Yeah.
Why is it the Intercontinental Derby if it's in Istanbul?
Yeah, because you have the Bosphorus that splits Istanbul in half, and the Bosphorus divides Europe and Asia. Galatasaray...
It's a river, right?
Yes.
It's a big old river.
It is indeed. Galatasaray, founded by high school students at Galatasaray High School, not surprisingly, in 1905. That was on the European side, which is considered to be, that was in the area where the embassies were, because Istanbul, Constantinople actually, at the time, was still the capital. You couldn't have it in the old city, so all of these, the cosmopolitan part of Istanbul was where Galatasaray was founded. On the opposite side of the Bosphorus, on the Asian side, was where Fenerbahce was founded in 1907 by basically locals in that area, but that was definitely not the glamorous side. It was basically where you lived because you couldn't afford to live in the other two parts of the city.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of the dynamic for the longest time. Galatasaray, the rich cosmopolitan team, Fenerbahce, the working class team. That has very much...
It's like a Queens Manhattan thing.
Yes. That has very much changed, though, nowadays, because both of them are very wealthy, very cosmopolitan, cosmopolitan, very rich. Beşiktaş, I would say, is the if you. Like, I think I've said this before, but like if you have a taxi driver, that person supports Beşiktaş.
Why is that then?
I think it's the club. It's the blue collar club.
I see.
Their ultras are called Çarşı. Their symbol is the like anarchy logo. They're all about like May Day. They're the ones who are out there protesting for workers' rights.
Actually, I'm interested in this for a second. The teams that get left out.
Yeah.
Because one thing I forgot to mention with the Ajax Rotterdam thing is that there's PSV Eindhoven, who are the other huge team in the Netherlands.
Yeah.
But just no one's interested in having them in this derby, right?
Oh, I mean, Beşiktaş and
Fenerbahce
Fenerbahce don't like each other. Beşiktaş and Galatasaray don't really like each other.
So this is a three-way derby, but the Galatasaray Fenerbahce thing just overshadows any of the other triangulations.
But I would say that like if you ask a Fenerbahce fan, they'll be like, I don't really like Beşiktaş, but they'll like have friends who are Beşiktaş fans and so forth. But they will be like, I do not like Galatasaray. So and I think that's the
so
same.
The emphasis is different.
I think Beşiktaş, at least when I was there, was much more of a like neutral team. That said, in recent years they've started winning the league. They've had more money to spend, and so maybe that dynamic has changed a bit.
Yeah.
I would say really quickly, sorry, because I know I'm going on. Two things that stand out to me. I almost wanted to say the Beşiktaş-Fenerbahce rivalry, to your point, because Beşiktaş's old stadium and new stadium are both right on the banks of the Bosphorus, right by Dolmabahce Palace on the European side. Karaköy is where Fenerbahce is in Turkey and Istanbul. They're also kind of right on the water, and so you can take ferries from one to the other. And when my wife and I first moved there... When we first moved there in 2011, there was a match day coming up. Our apartment was right by Beşiktaş Stadium, so we could walk down. And the ferries coming across all had these giant blue and yellow flags, blue and yellow flares going off. And it straight up looked like an invading army was coming in. And the whole major road was shut down. There were police everywhere. That was where I was told.
There's something about crossing a river to go to the derby match. Yeah, that
was what we were watching, like from the like the sidewalk, as a Turkish police officer said to us, like the İyi akşamlar, which is good night. And we were like, oh, good night to you. And then he just stood there and looked at us and we were like, oh, you're saying get out of here. Gotcha. So that kind of was the first time I saw that level of intensity between two fans, and to see it that much more intensified because now the stadium ban has been withdrawn. Yeah. Galatasaray fans can go to Fenerbahce games, and it's pretty darn intense.
Kickers Charlton's pretty intense.
This is very true
as well, though. So my final one. Do you have anything else on Galatasaray Fenerbahce? I can see from your face that you do.
I do, and
Go on.
I can't. This is very dorky. It's just there was a time in 1912 when when the Ottoman Empire still existed. So you had all of these different countries and these different ethnic groups comprising different parts. They made their own teams. So the founders of Galatasaray and Fenerbahce, or the then presidents, decided they were going to form one Turkish club, so that it would be like this one Turkish team would always beat all of the other nationalities in Turkey. It was called like the Turkabulu, which is like the Turkish club. Yeah. And it was this big plan. They presented it to the IOC. It was approved. And then the Balkan War happened, and the Ottoman Empire lost like 5 of their territories, and then it was sort of not needed anymore, and so it kind of didn't happen. But just the idea that like history could be totally different, that you could have this one massive club, and instead like a war and the fall of an empire meant like, no, we'll still say our own separate entities.
Okay, my final one is the Seville Derby, also known as El Gran Derby. Weirdly spelled in Spanish, Derbi. So that's a whole third possibility to add to our whole thing. So the reason I chose the Seville Derby is El Clasico is maybe too obvious and maybe is its own separate show. The Madrid Derby in Spain, obviously also big, Real, Atletico. The Seville Derby I think of as a tragic but nice antidote to all the othering and fan violence that we had talked about previously. So the Seville Derby is Sevilla and Real Betis, right? This derby goes back to like 1915. I think Real Betis was formed as a sort of spin-off of renegade Sevilla fans, right? So it starts with that sort of bitterness, right? This had been kind of nasty, right? There'd been a lot of fighting. There'd been, the regular sort of intenseness that goes on when a whole city cares about a rivalry. It got to a peak in 2007 where Real Betis fans threw a bottle at Juan de Ramos, the Sevilla coach. Remember him? He went on to coach Spurs. Yeah. Threw a bottle at Juan de Ramos during a Copa del Rey, a cup match, knocked him unconscious, right? So this thing had got kind of nasty, as rivalries do. But then there's the tragedy of Antonio Puerta. Do you remember this? 2007, Antonio Puerta is a 22-year-old right back, plays for Sevilla. He has a heart attack, passes away. So this young right back dies. If you remember, I think in 2008 when Spain won the European Championship, a lot of them had Puerta's name.
Danny Guita, I think. I think he had his face on there or something like that.
Yeah. So this thing really united people. It united Sevilla and Real Betis. So in the immediate aftermath, this is not long after the Juan de Ramos incident. Antonio Puerta passes away. Hostilities kind of cease, right? Betis chairman and players all say very conciliatory, very nice things about Antonio Puerta. The Real Betis players show up to Puerta's funeral, right? And that is this big healing moment. And apparently ever since, when this derby has been played, some years it hasn't been played because Betis got relegated, it's been passionate but not violent. So this one tragic incident has kind of united what was once really bitter and hostile. So I take it as, obviously it's tragic that Puerta died. I take it as proof that rival fans can get beyond that hatred moment and maybe come back together at some point.
Yeah. All right. That's a good
That's why I chose it, because I didn't want to end on they hate each other and they throw things at each other.
That's a good note to end on. I like positivity. I like happiness. Well done, my friend.
Thank you. Anything else we want to talk about on this topic?
Kind of. Yeah. My final one I wanted to say, when it comes to like Eastern European derbies, in my opinion, there is a reason why they tend to sound more terrifying when you watch those games, and I think it's because
we're talking like Romania, Russia?
Yeah, well, like at least in Turkey, and I think in like some of the surrounding countries, is that they say goal when they score. Whereas, and if you can imagine that for a moment, in like the Premier League or in the United States, when somebody scores, everybody says yes, and you imagine like what your throat does to say yes, it always makes your voice go high, and if you say goal, it goes down. And so that's why like whenever there's goals scored, I think Germany they say Tor, right? So like just imagine saying that but yelling it, and that's why that whole stadium goes deep. And I feel like that deep kind of roar is always a little bit more intimidating and terrifying than the yeah at the end that goes way up. So I think that always adds a level of intensity to some of these derbies for me.
All right, the things you learn on Soccer 101. Thank you for listening to this episode of Soccer 101. If you've enjoyed it, please review it. Please subscribe via iTunes or Apple Podcasts, as they call it now. Please tell your friends about it. Really spread the word about Soccer 101. Also, if this is the first episode you've heard, be aware, there's a whole bunch of episodes. You can scroll through the list, and every episode is just a different piece of soccer trivia, a soccer question. We'll have an answer in there.
We sure will.
All right, I've been Daryl Grove.
I've been Taylor Rockwell.
Thank you for listening to Soccer 101.